We've been taught to trust the great poets and painters whose words and canvases seem to have forever captured the cracking frosts, blizzards, and frozen rivers. These images feel like they've always been a part of the landscape. But what if we've been reading their messages all wrong? What if the greatest secret isn't in what they depicted, but when and how they did it? People say, just look at the paintings, there's snow everywhere. Very well, let's do just that. Let's begin our investigation with the most famous works of art, the ones we feel we know by heart. And be prepared for the world as you know it to start changing before your very eyes. The first piece of evidence in our case is the painting The Thaw by Fyodor Vasilyev from 1871. At first glance, it's a typical winter landscape, but let's look closer at the details. The canvas depicts the beginning of winter, January, yet there's barely 15 to 20 centimeters of snow on the ground. The stream in the center of the composition is completely unfrozen, its dark water flowing freely amidst the melting snow. The people trudging along the road are dressed strangely, as if the cold caught them by surprise. But most interesting of all, in the background we can see trees that seem to still have their leaves. Add to this an extraordinary abundance of birds for a winter field, where they should have nothing to eat. All of this paints a picture not of a harsh January, but of a lingering autumn, suddenly dusted with snow. Now let's turn to the classic painting The Rooks Have Arrived by Alexei Savrasov. We learn in school that rooks return in March, heralding the arrival of spring. The painting shows us this exact moment. But what do we see? The snow in the fields has almost completely melted. The ground is bare, and green grass is visible in the background. In the foreground, there's a huge puddle of meltwater. It gives the distinct impression that spring has not only begun, but has long been in full swing. For our modern perception, this is a surprisingly warm scene for early March in central Russia, near Kostroma, where this landscape was painted. Historical weather records, available from the 1880s, paint a much colder picture of March for these areas. It turns out that Savrasov, without knowing it, documented not just the arrival of spring, but the end of a very short and mild winter. These observations raise a logical question. Why does winter in the famous paintings from this period look so hesitant, almost European? The snow falls late, doesn't last long, and the rivers and streams are not bound by ice. But we also remember other paintings, true hymns to the Russian winter. The works of Sudakov with his snow towns, Shishkin with his snow-covered forests, the works of Yuli Clever, where blizzards and snowdrifts are shown in all their might. It is these images that created the myth of the eternal winter. And here we come to the main puzzle. It seems that these paintings contradict the first ones, but there is no contradiction. There is something more interesting, a chronological gap. The secret lies not in what was painted, but when it was painted. If we place all these famous winter landscapes on a timeline, we will discover a shocking pattern. A moment when winter seemed to be switched on, with the flick of a switch. And this timeline switch truly exists. If you carefully examine the creation dates of these famous works, a striking picture emerges. A period around the 1860s acts like an invisible wall, a point in time when art stepped into a completely new climatic world. Before this period, we see mild, low-snow winters. And what about after? What follows is a cascade of work celebrating the Russian winter in all its power and beauty. Let's trace this chronology. Here is Alexei Savrasov, the author of The Rooks, painting winter in 1870. This already has a completely different mood, and it only grows from there. We see a true frosty apotheosis in Vasily Surakov's The Capture of the Snow Town, painted in 1891. This canvas is a hymn to a real snowy winter. Huge snowdrifts from which children build a fortress. Horses harnessed to sleds sinking in the snow. Breath turning to steam in the air. Every detail screams of a deep, established winter season with heavy precipitation. This is the very image that we strongly associate with the Russian winter. Or take Yuli Clever, whose winter landscapes became his signature. His famous winter landscape with a hut is dated 1897. Almost all of his most famous works depicting snow-covered forests, blizzards, and huts buried in snow up to their roofs were created in the 1890s. He became a master of depicting this harsh and commanding winter because, apparently, such a winter had become the reality of his time. Even the works of Ivan Shishkin, a master of forest landscapes, fit this concept. His painting First Snow was painted in 1875. In it, we see birch trees that haven't fully shed their leaves, dusted with the first light snow. But the most interesting part is the history of the painting. It was presented at the 4th exhibition of the Peredvishniki, which opened on February 20th, 1875. This means the artist was painting his first snow sometime between January and February. It turns out that even in 1875, the first snow worthy of an artist's brush could fall this late. This perfectly matches the picture of a short winter that begins in January and, as we saw with Savrasov, is almost gone by March. The list is endless. Winter Road by Alexei Kamenev, 1866. Winter Forest by Carl Rosen, an artist born only in 1864, meaning he painted his works even later. Torzhok by Konstantin Gorbatov, from 1917. The pattern forms a single, undeniable picture. The overwhelming majority of famous artworks that created the canonical image of the Russian winter appeared after the 1860s and 1870s. This can no longer be a simple coincidence or a change in artistic fashion. It seems that something fundamental happened during this period. A sharp and radical climate change occurred. Artists didn't just start looking at the world in a new way. They began to reflect a new reality that was unfolding outside their studio windows. They began to paint the real, harsh winter on a massive scale because it had simply appeared in the form we are familiar with. But art, even the most realistic, always leaves room for fiction and interpretation. So what does the impartial technology of the time, photography, have to say? If winter truly arrived so suddenly, the camera lens should have captured it. The answer, held in old photo archives, turns out to be even stranger and more inexplicable than the riddles of painting. It points not just to a change, but to the actual appearance of snow from nothingness. Painting, for all its pursuit of realism, leaves room for imagination and artistic interpretation. But photography is a document of its era, an impartial slice of reality, captured by light on a plate. It should have given us the final answer on the question of the Russian winter, and it does. Only this answer turns out to be even more frightening and mysterious than anything we've seen on the canvases of artists. If we turn to the photo archives of the 19th century, we encounter a startling phenomenon: a photographic vacuum. In countless early photographs taken before the 1880s, winter is practically absent. We see the familiar streets of Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other cities, the same buildings, the same people in carriages. But something critically important is missing from these images: snow. It's just not there. Official history offers a simple and logical explanation for this fact. At first glance, the photographic technology of those years was supposedly imperfect and did not allow for shooting in the cold. The chemical processes on the photographic plates slowed down, the emulsion could freeze, and the equipment itself was too cumbersome to operate in difficult weather conditions. This argument seems convincing until we start asking simple questions. This is where logic begins to falter and crumble under the pressure of other historical facts. Imagine a world where photography is a new, revolutionary art. Every photographer strives not just to capture reality, but to make history, to do what no one has done before. It's astonishing that over several decades, not a single ambitious photo artist attempted to be the first to capture a real Russian winter on film. It would have been not just a technical breakthrough, but a major event in the art world. But no one even tried. Moreover, the simplest way to bypass the technical difficulties would be to take a picture from the window of a warm apartment. It was in this very way, completely by accident from his workshop window, that Louis Daguerre took the first photograph of a person in history. Why did no one think to point a lens at a snow-covered street while in comfort and warmth? And here, the official version collapses completely and irrevocably. While we are told about the impossibility of photographing a snowdrift because of the cold, history presents us with an absolutely incredible fact. In 1856, the German inventor Wilhelm Bauer, while aboard his submarine during tests in the Kronstadt harbor, took the world's first underwater photograph. Think about that. Humanity managed to overcome colossal technical difficulties, creating a waterproof housing, solving the problem of lighting underwater, dealing with pressure, all in 1856. At the same time, enthusiasts managed to photograph lightning and even tornadoes. But capturing the snow lying outside a window was considered an impossible task? This explanation does not stand up to any criticism. The absurdity of the situation leads to the only possible conclusion. Snow wasn't just not being photographed. It seems it didn't exist in the form we know it. There were no many of those snowdrifts, those snow-covered landscapes that could have been proudly captured. Otherwise, they would have been, without a doubt. And then, sometime in the 1880s, something strange happens. Snow simply appears in photographs. Suddenly and en masse. We see the same angles, the same streets, the same people, but a new element has been added to the scenery of reality, as if it really wasn't there before, or there was so little of it that it didn't deserve the camera's attention. The concept of the photograph doesn't change, the reality it captures changes. This is no longer the fiction of an artist. It's an objective fact documented by technology. All of this points to a colossal, abrupt, and relatively recent climate change. But was this cataclysm local, affecting only the territory of Russia? To understand the true scale of what happened, we will have to step outside our country and our time. We must look at documents that are older than both painting and photography. We need to unroll the old maps of the world, because what they depict will lead us to believe that in the past, our entire planet looked completely different. And the mystery of the Russian winter is just a small part of a much grander and more staggering puzzle. The mystery of the phantom snow in old photographs forces us to take the next logical step. If the climate in the vast territory of Russia changed so abruptly and so recently, was this a local event? Or have we encountered traces of a global transformation, echoes of which can be found all over the world? To answer this question, we must turn to witnesses even more ancient than photography, or even 19th century painting. We must unroll old maps and prepare to see a world on them that we would simply not recognize today. Unrolling a map of Muscovy and Tartary, compiled by the English diplomat Anthony Jenkinson in 1562, we are immersed in a reality that contradicts everything we learned in school. This map is not just a schematic sketch, but a detailed document created based on personal travels and testimonies. Let's mentally transport ourselves to the territories we now know as Siberia, a realm of permafrost, extreme cold, and impassable taiga. What did a 16th century European traveler depict there? Instead of the familiar image of endless snows, the engraver depicted lands inhabited by lightly clothed people. They are wearing short tunics, their arms and legs are bare, and they have light headbands. Roaming beside them are camels, animals we strongly associate with the hot deserts and steppes of Central Asia, but not with Siberian frosts. This is not a random detail or an artist's fantasy. Camels are depicted as an ordinary part of local life, as transport and livestock. This entire visual narrative creates a picture of a temperate, if not warm climate where, according to our understanding, eternal winter should reign. But perhaps this is the mistake of a specific cartographer? To check this, let's use the method of contrast. If it was warm in the cold regions of the planet, what was happening in the hot ones? Let's turn to ancient maps of Africa from the same period. In the place where the lifeless, sun-scorched Sahara Desert now stretches for thousands of kilometers, we see something incredible. Cartographers of the past meticulously drew dense forests, full-flowing rivers, and numerous lakes in these lands. The network of settlements was so dense that it could rival the heavily populated areas of Europe. The legendary city of Timbuktu, which today stands on the edge of the desert, is depicted on old maps as being located on the bank of a large river, surrounded by greenery and a thriving civilization. This was not a desert, but a living, fertile, and densely populated region. Now let's put these two pieces of the puzzle together. Siberia, where camels roam, and a blooming, water-rich North Africa. These facts don't just contradict the modern climate map of the world, they completely turn it upside down. No theories about local climate fluctuations can explain such fundamental differences. The only explanation capable of tying together these seemingly disparate facts is the assumption that the Earth's geographic poles were in a different location in the past. If we imagine that the North Pole was shifted, for example, towards Greenland or North America, then the entire climate grid of the planet would have shifted. Siberia would have been in temperate latitudes, suitable for the life and economy we see on Jenkinson's map. And the equatorial rains would have shifted north, turning the Sahara into a blooming garden. This is a staggering hypothesis, but it logically follows from the observed facts. Old maps are not just fantasies. They are documents that reflect the world as our ancestors saw it. And this world was structured completely differently. This means that the catastrophe that changed the climate in Russia in the mid-19th century was only the final chord, the last jolt in the process of a global restructuring of the entire planetary system. But if the very geography and climate of the planet were different, what can be said about the history that unfolded in this setting? Can we trust the official historical version, which is written as if the world has always been as it is today? To find the answer, we must once again return to the 19th century and look closely at how official history was created. And we will find such glaring inconsistencies and anachronisms in it that will prove that its authors did not just make mistakes, but perhaps constructed a past that never existed. The hypothesis of a shift in the geographic poles and, consequently, a completely different climate in the past takes our investigation to a whole new level. If the planet was different, then the history that unfolded on this planet must also have been different. We have already seen that painting and photography only began to record the onset of our familiar winter after the 1860s. But let's return to the 19th century sources that shaped our understanding of the past. We will find in them not just errors, but flagrant anachronisms that point to one thing. Those who wrote history in the 19th century did not know it themselves. Let's carefully examine the paintings and sculptures created in the 19th century that illustrated historical events or depicted great figures of the past. In many of them, we see classic scenes. A Russian troika speeding through the snow, carrying an aristocrat, perhaps a prince or a boyar, with his beloved by his side. It's a textbook, almost folk art image. But it is complete historical nonsense. The boyars as a class were abolished in Russia long before the Russian Troika itself. A specific way of harnessing three horses was even developed, which happened much later in the 18th and 19th centuries. Thus, these scenes, which we consider a reflection of Old Rus, are pure fantasy on the part of the authors. The artists, fulfilling commissions, painted fictional scenes, combining elements from different eras with which they were apparently unfamiliar or did not feel the need to maintain chronological accuracy. Look at the monuments erected in the 19th century, for example, on Red Square in Moscow, or the images of princes in history textbooks. Almost all of them are depicted with a mandatory Orthodox cross around their neck. This seems natural for a Christian state, but it contradicts not only archaeology, but also official history itself. Historians and archaeologists later discovered with surprise that in the graves of a Christian state, which at the time these monuments were created had existed for over 900 years, pectoral crosses on commoners and even nobility are practically non-existent. The explanation that historians later gave for this phenomenon is stunning. According to the official version, until 1742, only bishops could wear pectoral crosses. Any layman, be he a prince, a boyar, or even a thrice holy saint, had no right to wear a cross. This was the exclusive prerogative of the clergy. Thus, the depiction on monuments and paintings of Prince Pozharsky or Prince Michael of Tver with pectoral crosses is a gross historical anachronism. This proves that those who created these images in the 19th century, sculptors, artists, and perhaps their patrons, had absolutely no knowledge of the real historical facts about ancient Russian life and church regulations. They were simply introducing a new tradition, projecting their contemporary ideas onto the distant past. If the authors of the 19th century were so ignorant of basic historical matters such as the right to wear a cross or the time gap between boyars and troikas, can we trust their descriptions of the climate? If an artist could invent a cross on a prince's neck, he could just as easily invent a thick fur coat on a boyar, or create a snowy landscape based on a reality that had only just appeared and had not yet settled. All these inconsistencies indicate that the 19th century was not just a time of change, but a time when an active consolidation of a new version of history and a new reality was taking place. In the paintings, photographs, and monuments, we see not a reflection of the eternal, but the documentation of an era that arrived suddenly. An era where winter became long and cold, where pectoral crosses became a mandatory attribute, and where old concepts of climate, geography, and even history were either erased or rewritten. This brings us to the final, most intriguing question. Why did the world change so radically in the mid-19th century? If it was a global event related to a pole shift, it could have been the result of a powerful natural cataclysm. But what if it wasn't a natural accident, but a controlled process? And what if what we call global warming today is not an anomaly, but the planet's return to the very natural state that existed before the 19th century? The answer to this question lies at the very end of the 20th century, and it connects our investigation to the most controversial and perhaps the most dangerous experiment in human history. Our investigation has led us to a startling conclusion. The world we considered constant actually underwent a colossal transformation in the relatively recent past, in the mid-19th century. We've seen how a harsh winter suddenly switched on in paintings and photographs, how ancient maps depict a completely different planetary geography, and how the creators of 19th century history made glaring errors in describing the past. All these threads weave into a single tapestry, pointing to a global disruption, a catastrophe that reformatted not only the climate, but perhaps history itself. But what if this wasn't an accident? What if it was the beginning of a long and complex experiment, and we are witnessing its conclusion today? To understand this, let's move from the past to the present and look at the news headlines. We are bombarded from all sides with fears of global warming. We are shown melting glaciers, told of abnormally warm winters, and unprecedented climate records. But what if we look at this from a different angle? What if this isn't warming, but a return? The planet's slow but steady return to its natural original state, which was the norm before the catastrophic shift in the 1860s. Remember the paintings of the mild winter of the 19th century? Little snow, unfrozen rivers, a late arrival of cold. Now look out the window in a modern January. More and more often we see the same picture. The calendar winter has not matched the actual weather for years. In southern regions, for example, in Sochi, lilac, mimosa, and even snowdrops begin to bloom in December. What is today called an anomaly is strikingly reminiscent of that same Euro winter which, it seems, was the norm before the 1860s. We are not heating up. We are thawing out after a long period of artificial or abnormal cold. And here, the most daring and perhaps the most dangerous part of our hypothesis takes the stage. What if the mini ice age observed in the second half of the 20th century was not a natural climate cycle? There is a persistent view that the Soviet Union and the United States, with their numerous and extremely powerful nuclear tests, which peaked in the late 1950s and early 1960s, severely disrupted the Earth's climate balance. Note the date. Exactly 100 years after the very climatic anomaly we tracked in the 19th century. Isn't that too strange a coincidence? Perhaps we are seeing traces of a deliberate and controlled impact on the climate. Imagine that after the global catastrophe of the mid-19th century, the planet began a slow process of healing, returning to its former warm state. This process could have led to undesirable consequences for those who wanted to maintain the New World Order. And so, in the mid-20th century, a new mechanism was launched: nuclear tests, which, by lifting millions of tons of dust into the stratosphere, triggered a miniature nuclear winter effect, artificially cooling the planet and slowing down natural processes. Why was this necessary? The answer may be hidden on our planet's southernmost continent, Antarctica. Today it is covered by a multi-kilometer ice sheet. But what if this ice sheet is as recent a phenomenon as the harsh Russian winter? The melting of Antarctica's glaciers is not just a threat of rising sea levels. It is a threat of revealing what lies beneath the ice. And there could be anything there. Ruins of ancient civilizations, traces of unknown technologies, artifacts capable of completely rewriting the entire known history of humanity. Perhaps the global project to control the climate was launched precisely to prevent this revelation, to keep the secret of Antarctica frozen. But today, this mechanism seems to have stopped working. The planet is reclaiming its own. The glaciers are melting faster than ever, and we may be on the verge of the greatest discoveries in history. Thus, our investigation, which began with the analysis of old paintings, brings us to the level of global conspiracy, where history, climatology, and geopolitics intertwine. We live in a unique time when the veil over the past is beginning to lift, and the main question that remains is this: are we witnesses of a natural cycle, or are we pawns in a grand, centuries-old game, the goal of which is to hide the true history of our planet and our species? The answer, perhaps, is already breaking through the melting ice at the edge of the world.